y'all. Welcome back to Georgia Smothered and Covered. I'm Ashley. So glad to be with you today. I'm so glad y'all decided to tune in with us. Today, we are talking about the Georgia PSC, but we aren't talking about the Public Service Commission, the folks that regulate your utilities, your telecom, and all that. No. We're talking about another PSC, and this is the Professional Standards Commission. And this is the committee that really deals with our education and our teachers and all of the training and ensuring that our kids are getting taught by some of the best. But we're going to talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion and the attack on it. It's being attacked across the country, particularly here in the South, particularly here in Georgia. And so I'm so excited that we are going to have this conversation with two ladies today. Michaela Arciaga, who is the Georgia Advocacy Director of the Intercultural Development Research Association, where she connects parents, students, and community members with the resources needed to engage in state policy making process, which is so very important. As a former teacher, she's passionate about creating culturally inclusive learning environments, which is again, so important. Accessibility for our students with disabilities and authentic engagement for parents and families. So welcome, Michaela. So glad to have you.
Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be here.
Yes, absolutely. And Arian Montgomery. Arian is a former public school educator. You taught 12th grade social studies. So we're going to get into that in the conversation. And department chair who works with marginalized groups in public education to get them the resources and guidance needed for equitable representation. She's the founder, president, and CEO of Georgia Educators for Equity and Justice Incorporated. It's a 501c3 organization that's dedicated to the liberation and belonging of Black educators, students, and educational stakeholders across the state of Georgia. Arian, welcome.
Thank you so much.
So glad to have y'all. So the attack on DEI, so the Professional Standards Committee decided in a June 8th vote to remove the words diversity, equity, and inclusion. What the hell is that about? Can somebody tell me what's going on here?
So I think it's important to note the commission is responsible for certifying teachers, school counselors, librarians, principals, assistant principals, superintendents, anyone who is a certified public educator in the state of Georgia goes through the Professional Standards
It's interfacing
Commission.
with our children every day.
That's a huge amount of impact on our kids.
Yeah.
And so what's happening is that they also set the standards for educator preparation programs all across the state. I think there's over 60, I think there's 67 of them the last I looked. And those are those programs at the university where you have students, usually undergrad, who are interested in being teachers, taking education classes, and working towards getting their certification as a teacher. That's also anyone who is already an existing teacher who wants a master's or higher education training in education. And so that has huge ripple effects so any changes to those programs has a huge ripple effect into our classrooms and on our kids. And so what's happening is they are changing the standards that dictate how those programs operate. So they are systematically going through every single education program and purging any words that have to do with diversity, equity, or inclusion. But that also means, so it's those three words, but that also means things like bias, linguistic diversity, cultural diversity, and as well as a definition of diversity. So this has been happening for months, actually. They purged the definition of diversity that included both individual differences. So that's like your personality, your learning modality, your attitude in school, the things that kind of make you how you manifest every day. And then also your group differences. So that's like the identity you bring in every day, right? Like your race, your socioeconomic status, your ability, your political beliefs, your language, your gender, your sexual orientation, the things that are like those protected classes, actually. And so they've removed those definitions, they've removed those words, and we're deeply concerned about what that means for the future of teaching in Georgia and for our kids.
Yeah. Yeah. What do you think about that?
Well, I think that this is, first of all, it's a heinous crime that they have even been able to do something like this in the sense. And honestly, the Georgia Professional Standards Commission, don't get me wrong, was founded like sometime in the 90s, right? And so before, there was really not any regulation. And so it just is so interesting how these people that are so detached from education, they said there's current educators in there, but there's no way to know for sure, as we've been trying to look for data to see like who are these people.
Yeah.
And are you guys teaching in areas that have heavy populations of marginalized students? And so with this being said, a lot of these universities do want to teach diversity, equity, inclusion. I went through a MAT program, that is a Master's Art in Teaching at Georgia State, the Georgia State University.
Here.
Excuse me, just had to get that right.
Shout out
to Georgia State. And I learned so much about my internal trauma, or the trauma that I internalized as a student, a Title I student in a very affluent school. I went to Brookwood High School in Snellville. My mom was a parapro, and so I was on a permissive transfer, and being the only Black kid in class sometimes was very, very difficult. You know, I had some teachers that absolutely had bias, and that's why I thought, you know, especially going into such an interesting time in our history where the racial upheaval is at its highest point. I want to say it's really almost at its peak at this point. There has to be intentionality behind really teaching our students and teaching our teachers how to make sure that we are inclusive of one another. And so not only is diversity, equity, inclusion important for teachers to then be able to be there for their students in the classroom, it's important for students to learn this because, again, they are going to be getting out here eventually once they graduate, getting out into the workforce. And then it's also important because we have to treat each other nice within our own teams as teachers, as admin. And so intentionally taking out these words can have disparaging ramifications really on the recruitment and retention of a diverse teacher workforce.
Yeah, yeah. So really the entire kind of whole, like the entire scope of what diversity, equity, and inclusion is, not only for teachers and for students. Why do y'all think, though, these three words are the ones that are being attacked?
What do you think?
So I will say this, it is the ignorance. So there was I would call it a red scare. I am a social studies teacher.
Okay.
There was a red scare around critical race theory. And I want to say this was about 2 years ago where a lot of, I will say, the privileged constituents of the state of Georgia, as well as across the United States, were upset about having to face authentic history of the United States. It is true, okay, that the United States was built on the backs of marginalized identities, of people with marginalized identities. We're talking about our indigenous folks, we're talking about our Latinx folks, and we're talking about our Black people. And so now they do not want to face this. They don't want to face this because they feel uncomfortable and they're afraid that their own children will feel uncomfortable. But I have taught school. I also have teachers that teach different age groups, and the students are not feeling uncomfortable. They do want to learn this. They are in a more diverse world now. And also they have so much more access to different people outside of just who they're socialized to be around all the time because of the age of technology. And so really it is these, I won't say those with age, constituents that do not want to change their mind and continue to feel as if they want to live in this privilege. And one thing about just really social justice in general is everybody does want to keep their privilege. I understand that. If somebody came to me today and was like, your degree no longer matters, everybody's equal, I would be a little bit confused because I'm still looking at those student loans. So I don't fault them for really wanting to stick in their privilege. But what I do fault them for is, let's start to learn together. Let's learn together to make this a better place for everybody. So I would say the privileged few constituents, I always say, I like that's my term, that they are trying to halt this, world from really making sure we're being inclusive of everybody's identity.
I wonder, does it create a space of divisiveness with the children? Like, if you're focusing on these three words, are you creating this this existence that a place of intoleration? Are you creating a space that, and I think even to your point, where children are around so much more diverse people every day, is this in some ways like creating a space that they, couldn't want to be more tolerant of other people, or maybe even just more inclusive, or it's, I hate the thought that you are teaching children first, not the real history. I know we're in a space now where we have book bans and CRT, and teachers are being attacked for teaching or even watching certain films or different movies and all of those types of things. But are we starting to create a culture, or is there a culture that's attempting to be developed where we aren't creating a more inclusive society by removing these like infrastructure standards?
I think there's a couple of things at play. One, I think that the attacks on DEI are very strategic.
Yeah.
Because I think, exactly like Arian said, it's an easy thing to scare people about, which I think is a really misguided interpretation of what DEI is, which I would hesitate to say like any of us are attached to DEI as a framework.
Right.
But it's more the practices that
yeah.
it represents, the practices of teaching kids how to recognize, not even how to recognize difference, but how to collaborate amidst differences, which I think most parents want for their kids. They know that the world is diversifying. They know that the workforce is diversifying, and they want their kids to be competent and competitive in that workforce and world.
Yeah.
But I think using those three words is a really convenient way to distill exactly what you're talking about, this increasingly divisive political environment. But I don't want to over-ascribe this to misintention. I absolutely think it is intentional. I think we would be remiss to not look at this in the bigger picture of all the things, the CRT scare, the like increased policing of our kids in schools and in our cities. I think it all kind of ties into this effort. We know that on the very, very far other side, the ultimate goal is to repeal the Civil Rights Act. And they've said that. They've told us that. They've put it in writing that that is what they want to do. And so I look at all of this from like, that's the goal, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the way that you do that is to make people who are different scary and hostile. And you teach your children that they should be scared and hostile towards anyone who's different. Yeah. And that's what this is. So I think some of it is very much rooted in like real fear for kids, like parents' real fear for their kids. But I also think that that fear is being manipulated by people who truly just want to cling to power and privilege in the most pernicious and like vicious ways. Yeah. So yes, the short answer to your question, I think, is yes. But I think it's like tied up in so many different things that it's hard to
so layered.
Say it's just the one thing, right?
I know, yeah. I mean, I hate to think about kids, and inherently children are curious and they love one another and they have friends that are everybody. And I met this person at school today, mommy and daddy and whoever. Like it's such an innocent time in their lives. And of course, when they grow up, you keep these friends along the way. And in some way, even just the thought of not being able to have a space of kindness and inclusion. Like, I think it even kind of goes beyond like just these 3 standard words and like just their definitions, and like more of like what is the culture that we're starting to develop internally with our children too, and internally as teachers and within our administrations and stuff. So when we're thinking about what was the process of getting these words removed?
Well, it's like it's any like bureaucratic thing that is done. The commission is dictated by Georgia laws, but basically they are required to notify the public that they are making a rule change. So they'll do that 2 months in advance of the meeting where they're going to make the change. And then they give a month of public comment. The public comment has to be submitted in writing or in email. So it has to be mailed or by email. Those are the only ways that you can submit public comment. The general public does not have access to those comments. The only way we know if comment has happened is they will report a number of comments received at each meeting. Which is just, that is the face that I made the first time I read that policy. That doesn't seem very transparent or accessible. And it's not by design. And again, these 18 people are just random folks appointed by the governor. So we don't know anything about them. We don't know how they practice as teachers. Some of these are people that have made careers on advocating for DEI work, which is incredibly trippy. But it's almost purely written. You have to email it to them. You have to know it's happening, and you have to get it within the window. And the window closes 2 weeks before the meeting is actually scheduled. So if you're not keeping track of each of these little dates, you might miss this process completely. And if we're talking about teachers, right now we're in the middle of summer. Otherwise, this is happening during the school year. Who is supposed to be advocating against or for these changes? And holding this group accountable?
It's all process.
It's a lot of bureaucracy.
Can we talk about the long-term impacts of this change, though? Like, how does it impact? Arian, you talked a little bit about it, but if you can expand on like what it will do for teachers, what it does for students, but like, I guess maybe even the standard that it sets for like if Georgia does this, or we voted, so when like how does that set us against other states when we're talking about DEI and all this?
Well, unfortunately, the South is very, very behind. Every time we, it's just, Georgia, Florida, Mississippi, the list goes on. We are so behind the 8 ball, and people don't want to talk about history, but we have to talk about the Black codes. We have to talk about Reconstruction. We have to talk about Jim Crow, because these are the reasons why we're still here in this mess, where we can even a governor or a commission can literally take out diversity, equity, inclusion, out of this teacher preparation program, taking all autonomy away from higher educational institutions. Taking it away from teachers as well. You know what I mean? And all these different school districts within the state of Georgia and across the South. It is so unfortunate that Georgia does not get the publicity that it needs to get. Typically, we're going to see Florida that has these situations with DEI because you have somebody that is just really loud spoken. But I think it's worse sometimes when you have it being very, very quiet. You have situations
because you get to move under the radar.
And we're having just as many attacks as Florida does. And so that's what I be trying to tell other, activists that are in different states, or they always consider and talk about Florida. I remember recently the Gathering Spot had a session about DEI in Florida. And we're in Georgia. I get like this notification, And I'm like super confused because the constituents in Georgia don't even know what's going on.
Right.
I put a post up of my rebuttal to the Georgia Professional Standards Commission, and I had a number of teachers hit me up on my page and was like, hey, I had no idea this was going on. I didn't even know this was under attack. I thought I couldn't teach these banned book issues. And so now you're taking DEI out. And so there's going to have devastating ramifications, not only in the higher education institutions, your universities and colleges, but it's also going to have situations that's going to occur within even the work environment and the psychological safety that is going to be needed to create and to sustain diverse set of educators.
Yeah.
And when we don't have that, what else do we have? We have trauma that's going to be again initiated by teachers that do not have to go through bias training. That is the main thing that needs to happen now. And that's one thing that I'll say these districts are being very scared about. They will not hold these teachers accountable to making, and we'll just all educational stakeholders, whoever come in contact with students, they should be held accountable for their bias, regardless of even if it is unconscious. So how do you do that? You make sure you're providing the professional development necessary to do that. And so you're going to start to see that DEI budget get slashed.
Yeah.
And so those professional developments that are typically going to be intentionally around making sure that making sure educational stakeholders are being inclusive, are having inclusive practices within their classroom and outside, not have to do those anymore and not have to be held accountable. And you're going to start to see teachers of color leave the workforce. We're already seeing them in droves. We're seeing all teachers leave the workforce. And now what is so interesting, I was doing some data digging today, and I want to say roughly 36.4% of the student population is Black.
In Georgia.
In Georgia, we have the highest percentage of students, Black students.
Wow.
We have more Black students than we do white students. And so it is so interesting that we're still catering our education system around white supremacy. I'm just going to say what it is. It's white supremacy.
Yeah.
And so people don't want to give up, these privileged few do not want to give up their Southern history, that's rooted in white supremacy, that's rooted in anti-Blackness. They don't want to give that up. And so we're going to constantly see students of color coming out of school not having the knowledge that they need to go into higher education and be successful. And it's unfortunate. And you're going to see teachers continually leaving the workforce, teachers that need to be in the classroom because they don't feel actualized there. I can honestly attest to the fact that I did not feel like I belonged in my school. I was a department chair and I got cussed out this year. You know what I mean? These are certain things that if we had
From parents or?
Oh, no. From my coworkers. There's certain things that happen that I'm just supposed to eat because I'm a Black woman. Yeah. And I'm strong and I'm this. And I can because I know the full spectrum of DEI. I know what it takes and I know why I'm being treated like this due to certain aspects of my identity. But if you're a teacher that's not educated in the why, this can really seem very difficult for you. And why would you be in a place that is underfunded? Why would you be somewhere where you're not valued when you can go out and do something else? And that's a detriment to our students because they need us in the classroom.
Absolutely.
Can I just say, I think all of that is true. And I think it's part of this larger movement, one, to destabilize and discredit what credit the public education system does have.
Yeah.
I think that's a huge part of it. I also think we have a trend of doing this in Georgia. If we're talking about the future impact of this, we saw this year in Florida, Texas, I think Tennessee also had attacks on diversity, equity, and inclusion programs at the higher ed level. And that is mainly where this is going to impact folks.
Yeah.
We had one filed this year. It did not move. But something that I think we have seen, and I was not here for the first part of this, but in the summer of 2020, the first summer of COVID, we also saw a huge reckoning around racial inequity, right? The murder of George Floyd was unfortunately one of those catalyzing events that saw some movement that we haven't seen on that scale in a really long time. And that summer, that following year, we saw 2021, we had a couple of censorship bills filed. They didn't really move. There was not a lot of energy around them. They were not super well supported. That summer of 21, Governor Kemp had his state board of education, which is also an appointed body, very similar to the commission, put out a resolution saying that they opposed the teaching of critical race theory. They opposed the teaching of divisive concepts, fundamental racism, systemic racism. And that resolution got a little bit of pushback. But then the following spring of 2022, we got the divisive concepts law.
Yep.
HB 1084, which prevented the teaching of systemic racism in the U.S., conversations around race, really. And I think this is the direct outcome of that. But I also think it's a kind of bellwether act to see how it's going to float this upcoming spring. We have another legislative session in January.
Yeah.
I would be shocked if we did not see the exact same kind of DEI attack on higher ed that we are seeing right now. He's floating it right now. That's what this is. This is a test to see what kind of opposition, who will be opposing it, how are they opposing it.
Yeah.
We're not going to not let it go. We're not going to let it go, but this is the test of the agenda for the spring. And so I think that's the other side of it, right?
Yeah.
There are all of these systemic ripples that are going to happen in our schools and play out there. It's also going to play out in the Capitol next spring.
It's also interesting to me, too, that in such a diverse state like Georgia, like when we talk about being uncomfortable with history, what do critics do on the other side? Like, you can't, it's not like Men in Black. Like, I can just put a pen in your face and like just erase hundreds of years of history. Because these things actually happened. So like, how do you combat that? Like, it's actual history. So
it's like, if you don't see it, doesn't exist. I really feel like that. And I think they want you to be so scared in the South to even bring this up. Like, you would be so surprised at how many teachers that are so scared to even talk about diversity, equity, inclusion when these laws started to get passed. And it's just the censorship. We're so used to it. It's almost as if we continue to allow ourselves to be in a marginalized position. And so even when speaking with other teachers, like, what are they going to do if you teach diversity, equity, inclusion? What are they going to do if you teach critical race theory? Because I'm going to be honest, I taught critical race theory in my class. If I'm teaching a controversial issues class, what would we talk about? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I'm like, what are they going to do? Fight me? Like, what's up then? Like, we about to take it outside. It's nothing. It's what's up. But you're not. And so the only thing that can right, or keep them on. Like, I'm just that one. You ain't gonna hit me, sweetie. But it's just so unfortunate. They keep you so pigeonholed. It's a mindset. So you think you're making like pennies on the dollar for the type of work that you're doing. You know, people have families. You know what I mean? People want stability. And so even in the South, like, we still stay in the South. We give money here. This has been a place of bloodshed. You know what I mean? And we're happy to be a Southerner. I'm a happy Black Southerner. But again, we cannot forget our history. Like, the civil rights movement was about 60 years ago. We're not too far removed.
Yeah.
And so I even think about Brown v. Board of Education, and we think about, we lost 75% of the Black teacher workforce. They had to leave their jobs because white parents did not want their white kids to learn from Black educators. And so we're still trying to build this up now. And so that's why we see such a very small percentage of Black teachers. And we don't even think about it. And it's just so unfortunate that this is the case because everybody's running around scared. And if we decided to become a collective, especially in Atlanta, this is what the Black Mecca. Why are we not holding each other's? Why are we not? Because I will say this, a lot of us still are living in survival mode.
Mm-hmm.
We don't even know. We don't even have the luxury to know what's going on. I'm just happy to be informed and happy to show up when I can and do the part that I do.
But
we
showing
want
up
to
is
bring
a privilege.
our brothers and sisters with us.
It really is. Showing up is a privilege for sure.
It's a privilege. They know that as soon as we, and I'll just speak on Gwinnett County, as soon as during summer 2020, we were able to create a successful grassroots movement that really changed the board. So it became predominantly Black.
Okay.
As soon as we did that, they said, ha, y'all thought, right? It's nonpartisan now. Ain't no more vote down ballot. I don't care. Yeah, y'all running on a Democratic ticket. Y'all thought. We not finna do that no more. They mobilize so fast. It's so swift. You're like, your head is spinning.
Right.
I was literally like shocked. I was like,
how they do
you know
this
what
so
I mean?
fast.
Like I could go sit down for a second, let them pass it on. Y'all y'all good? No.
Yeah.
You already got to be I don't like, this is one thing I will say even about politics in general. As soon as you are mobilizing and you get a win, people get tired. They done. They gonna take a break because they got their win. And you don't realize how they're already out mobilizing you.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna hold you. The Tea Party, they be mobilizing. I ain't gonna hold you.
All
I be
the
like,
time.
they're not just at the state level. They're not at the national level. They're at the state level. They're at the local level. They in their neighborhood clubs, in the apartment complexes, and then it is crazy that we as marginalized folks or folks of diverse identities have to realize that this is important. I think sometimes the education around why we do this, why is it important to show up at the polls, why is it important to show up at the school board meetings, why is it important to show up at legislative session, we just haven't received that yet. And we haven't received the ability to do that because we're always living in survival mode. It's unfortunate.
And it's so many things that we're fighting
Yeah.
at one time.
Right.
Yeah.
But I think the attack on education is incredibly calculated.
Yes.
Because education historically has been an incredibly liberatory tool. Maybe not the public education system, but education
itself. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And I do think when you have to start confronting the ways in which you have internalized white supremacy, it's not exactly fun. That's not a fun process. And when you're talking about people, like Arian said, if you don't see it, it's not real. If you're living in this community that is 100%, 97%, 98% white, which a lot of our rural districts where a lot of our legislators are coming from are, when are you ever going to have to confront that?
Yeah.
Unless you choose to. And why would you choose to be uncomfortable all the time? Because we're also talking about folks whose parents were on the other side of the civil rights movement, whose grandparents. That's a lot. I'm not saying they shouldn't, they should, but that is a lot to grapple with. And if you have all this power accumulated because your parents benefited so significantly from white supremacy, why would you want to give that up? Right. Especially when you're in such a position of power to continue to shore it up and protect it, which I don't want to say that's all it is.
Yeah.
Because I do think to a certain degree it is. I think that there are these folks who would be deeply hurt that you would imply that they're trying to harm kids. But I do think that there's a lack of when you don't have to interact with Black kids, poor kids,
brown kids,
disabled kids, brown kids, kids who speak another speak multiple languages. Why would you have to think about it?
What do some of the legislators say? Have you talked to any of them? You don't have to name names.
No. I mean, I do. I have, right? And I haven't talked to any particularly about this one.
Okay.
But like when the Divisive Concepts Law came out, I met with so many legislators and they were saying well, we know that racism is happening. We don't want kids to experience that in the classroom. So If we and it's interesting because it requires like going into that law and looking at exactly the way that it was written.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't outright say you can't talk about race. It says things like you can't have conversations about race that make children feel uncomfortable or anguished.
Mm.
So even if I'm talking about something like Rosa Parks on the bus getting arrested for standing her ground, right? A deeply upsetting story. This was an example actually given by a legislator.
Okay.
That is upsetting. They say that's not something that's banned. But then if we also start getting into like the Tulsa race riots, the burning of Atlanta, the driving, the establishment of Lake Lanier.
Yeah.
If we start talking about the ways in which we have systematically undermined and attacked Black communities, Indigenous communities, communities of color, that can become a deeply anguishing conversation, right? Especially if you've never seen that. And so I think misguided is too nice. But I do think there is something there, right? Like I think that they are using that to appeal to the better sense of a lot of like regular people.
Yeah.
I don't think our politicians are doing that, but I do think regular people resonate with that because they've never been exposed to a lot of the conversations or experiences that we're talking about. And so
do they think it's like the parents' responsibility to just have these levels of conversation around history for the things that are deeply uncomfortable?
I don't think they want people having these conversations at all.
Right.
And I think that's why you're attacking higher ed, right? Yeah. Like if you for a lot of us,
that's right. Yeah.
For a lot of people, college is when we really start to confront a lot of those lessons,
that's
right?
That's so true.
Especially in the South, where we've already seen like the influence of the Daughters of Confederacy to whitewash and to sanitize our history so that you end up in college not knowing a lot of these things already. Mm-hmm. College is going to be the first exposure a lot of kids have to these lessons.
Yeah.
Ever. A lot of these adults. When we were talking about it earlier, I'm like, talking about the kids, I worry about how this will impact the kids, but ultimately I think the kids have more access to information than they ever have.
Yeah, they do.
Yeah.
And they know they are holding adults accountable in a way that we are not holding each other accountable. But I worry about the impact of this on adults who do not have the exposure, who are not technologically literate, are culturally literate. But I just think, like, when you talk to them, I think that some of them are better at this than others, but there are definitely talking points that are just built on, we're just trying to protect kids. We're just trying to do what's right for kids. And I think Nobody doesn't want what's right for kids, right?
And if we can start at that baseline,
right?
Yeah,
right,
and move from there. Yeah,
but there's different definitions. Like that's where, and then once you move past that, those different definitions of what cause kids harm is where we start to lose folks.
Yeah,
because like Arian's talking about teaching about like current events. We're in the middle of a crisis where people are saying the public education system needs to do something different. One of the ways we do that is actually talking about the real world as it exists for kids right now.
Right now,
the experiences they're having right now that they bring into our classrooms every single day. I did it as a math teacher, social studies. Man.
Right.
Like, you have so much material.
I had so much material.
But
no, you did.
And I taught all the classes. I was like AP government
teacher.
Man.
But like
economics.
That's the kind of stuff that we know works. And we have the data and the evidence that is what works for kids. And teachers need to be equipped to talk about those things in a way that like gives kids these lessons, right? That teaches them to think critically, like, so I ran for school board in a pretty conservative part of the city of Atlanta. Mm-hmm. And I found out I was one of the only candidates who was answering questions about critical race theory. And that is why I say that, because like this is an extension of that conversation, right? Yeah. So many times I would say, like, someone would come at me about a resource and be like, well, I think this is terrible. This is critical race theory. And I'd say, well, have you read it? I will let you guess what the answer was.
Absolutely not.
I'm just gonna say
and that's the problem, right? But I also think that those in power are being proactive by taking it out of our schools right now and taking it out of those programs where they are most likely to be exposed to it. And then bring it to our kids.
And I also will say this. We're always prioritizing little Timmy and not Jaquan. respectfully. So who, again, if Jaquan has to walk his whole life, can't wear no hoodie, I can't be no Skittles, I can't have a tea. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. But I can't play with a water gun.
Right. Little Timmy hears something in class about his ancestors being inequitable. And I'm just saying that to be nice. Now it's a problem. Now, oh my God, all of the students, again, if we're thinking about Georgia, the students, white students are in the minority now.
How are teachers feeling?
It depends on the teacher.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
I have seen, I'm coming from Gwinnett County. And what's crazy is at a Title I school, you would think that you will have a lot of teachers of color. Especially in social studies. Social studies is a very interesting place to have these conversations and to have teachers from different ideological standpoints.
Yeah.
And so it would be a standoff sometimes in our meetings because this phrase now is taken over by the conservatives. I was going to say I was going to stand my ground, but I almost don't like to say that term.
Yeah.
But I had to protect students because
kind of immovable on your stance.
Yes, that I like that better. So yeah, I'm gonna keep that duly noted now. But I had to protect all students because of the type of deficit language around talking about students, talking about diversity, talking about really like they almost feel as if we're destroying education now by making it inclusive to all cultures and all histories. It's as if, and it's so unfortunate, it is as if we want to continue with this facade of just this white exceptionalism. Like this is just, or I'll call it American exceptionalism. Like this country has been built on the backs of these white people that came in here and made all these big businesses. And, you know, they had the nice, you know, Native Americans with Thanksgiving and the black people. Like I remember there was a textbook that said, you know, pretty much black people wanted to be slaves. Like they were benevolent slaves. And so they want to continue to paint this picture. And now that the story, people are starting to, the generations are starting to come up, the younger ones are starting to come up and speak out. They're no longer scared because we're in such a world now, whereas these traditional jobs and stuff, you don't have to do those anymore. And you can make money any type of way you want to make money now. And you can shop within your community now. And there's awareness now. And so it's so hard for them to even grasp that concept. So they want to snatch it out of the place where you can get it the most. Like in college, if I'm paying for my degree, Uncle Sam, you're not like all these other European countries that got me with some free education. How dare you? How dare you come in here and tell me what I can and cannot learn? Yeah. Because they don't want people to speak truth to power. That's what it is now.
I think it's an interesting thing too, because I actually worked in a Title I that was predominantly black staff.
Interesting.
Okay. And so it is interesting though when you're in like majority. I hate that phrase. But like majority when I was, I hate that phrase. But like, I was in a predominantly black and of color space, right?
Okay. And you need to tell the truth. Don't lie. Tell the truth.
No, well, that's what I'm saying. So when you are tell the truth. In a like space that is predominantly people of color, the other isms start to come out.
White supremacy.
Right. And so it's interesting because not all teachers were for incorporation of DEI, right? Because a lot of that actually started pre-2020. Like our rules came in 2016. Like the rules include those rules that they're changing now with that language have been in existence since that language has been there since 2016. So this is not a new change.
Oh, so this isn't a new introduction.
No, this language has been there for years, almost a decade, not quite. Yeah. But and I as 2016 was my first year as a teacher. Okay. Don't do anything. Okay.
I won't do the math. But math teacher.
I was not a traditional teacher, and I think that's important too because that's not necessarily how a lot of traditional teachers were trained. But I received an exceptional amount, I would say, focus on what folks would say is DEI.
Where'd you go? Where'd you go?
I know you know the answer. I was a Teach for America teacher. I know. And And I think what's and there we can unpack all kinds of stuff there, but
No,
I think it's really interesting.
Great folks that went through TFA.
I do too.
I know folks all over that spectrum. But what I think, I mean, I will say, having gone through it, I have a very healthy criticism of the pros and cons of that system, right?
Yeah, sure.
And but I think what I also have is I started from a lens of like inclusive teaching. And again, I want us to make sure that like we are not so married to this framework that we lose sight of like what it actually means, which is inclusive practices that are mindful and intentional of each of our kids. It's not necessarily even teaching about race or history per se. It's just like the specific strategies we as teachers would take to make our kids feel welcome and seen,
comfortable and included,
and valued.
Yeah.
And that's what we're talking about.
Yeah.
And so that's where I struggle, because they're talking about not hurting kids. And I want to get back to your original question, but they're talking about like protecting kids, and we're talking about protecting all kids.
Yeah.
Not just the kids that have been the standard, because that is what we're talking about. You said deficit lens. The word diverse is focusing on the assets that different kids bring into a classroom.
Agreed.
Beautiful.
When you switch diverse for different, you're immediately saying that that there is a standard that kid is not meeting.
That's deep.
And
Yeah,
so,
that is deep.
and
You
so,
got on here and then
but so I mean, but that also means like if that's not how you've been trained as a teacher, like that's a lot more mental work. Because I will say it is mentally exhausting to think about all of the different individual needs that my 31 14-year-olds needed to learn math at 7 a.m.
But also the work that it took for you to love those children in that way. And to for them to just feel and know that they were valued and included in the space that you're creating for them.
But I would say, I think that there's a lot of teachers who are inclusive teachers who would buck the idea of DEI. Is what I'm trying to say.
Okay.
Because they don't really care about the label so much as the practices. Does that make sense? I think DEI means something to like policy folks. It does mean something to teachers, but I think ultimately we're talking about the practices. And I do think that's part of why we are so concerned about this change. It indicates a bigger change that's going to impact our practices as teachers. And that's, I think, what teachers might be concerned about. But I also think there's a good contingent of teachers who are not going to be bothered by this, either because they're going to keep doing what they wanted to do anyway, which is inclusive teaching, and just call it something else, or it gives them a reason to stop having to do more work,
to force or to do the hard work,
exactly,
of getting to know or having to be more culturally competent or
sustaining
and arriving at a place of probably sometimes uncomfortability for them.
It is.
Yeah.
Well,
and I'm sure that sometimes it was uncomfortable for you.
100%. Are you kidding? Like, I had this is like my least favorite story, but like I had a moment my third year teaching where I had like 80% of my kids were failing. And I was like, I don't know what to do. And I had I had one white kid. I had 60% of my kids were labeled as students with disabilities or with behavioral disabilities. And it's like, okay, is it my kids or is it me?
Me, right. Yeah.
And am I setting my kids up in a way that like highlights what they actually know versus what they don't know? Right? And I think a lot of the way that we operate schools is focusing on what kids don't know.
Yeah.
Measuring what kids don't know.
Right.
Yeah.
Instead of figuring out what they do know and building on that
asset base.
But that's a lot of work.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a lot of work. And I had to completely change the way that I taught. I changed, and that was a lot. And I regularly tell people, if I had not had my first 2 years teaching and started at my third year, I would have quit easily. And the problem is we don't support teachers in this. We don't give them full training. This is still relatively new. And that's kind of
we get full training.
The insidious, they do. She does.
This is
But
not a
that's-
shameless plug, but it is.
Like,
Yes.
no, it should be because now teachers aren't going to be able to get that. Like,
Yes.
and that actually does hurt us on a national scale. These are national standards that we are moving away from. Mm-hmm. That is going to negatively impact the professionalism of our teachers.
Man, I mean, I thinking about all teachers have to face safety in the classroom, a diverse set of children, all of the
Yes.
personality types that come along with that, having to develop your curriculum around an ever-changing standard, pay. We didn't even talk about pay for real, y'all. I mean, like, to the teachers out there, God bless you, seriously. Like, truly, just like we say to our servicemen and women, thank you for your service, seriously. I mean, it is truly a thankless job. And I think, you know, like, when we're talking about this particular issue, teachers really, y'all have to arrive at some really, like, difficult places. I do want to, like, maybe when we talk more about the Professional Standards Commission, how do we hold those folks accountable?
We're trying to figure that out now.
Yep,
right?
we're
Yeah.
grappling with that right now.
Yeah.
This body is appointed.
Yeah.
They're not elected. That's a huge lever for accountability for most politicians. And these people are public servants.
Yeah.
I mean, the big one is like getting the governor to weigh in, getting the state superintendent to weigh in. Both of
They probably like
mean,
this. They probably weighed
exactly.
in prior, and that's why we're here now.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think this is part of a much larger strategic plan. So like all the levers that normal people would want to use to hold these people accountable are the levers that are moving this forward. But I don't know that it's so much about the commission. Truly.
Okay.
It matters.
Yeah.
And I think there are things. So I think the big things are like, these are all people that are supposed to be professionals. Of those 18, 9 are supposed to be professional educators.
Okay.
So if you are a professional educator who doesn't support the use of DEI strategies in your training, what are you doing in your classroom?
That's a good
What
question.
type of harm are you inflicting upon your students?
Exactly.
Yeah.
What kind of a harm are you? I think one thing I want to go back to really fast is when we think about DEI, I don't want to just think about the interactions between student and teacher.
Okay.
I want to think about the interaction within your work group. I want to think about the interaction between you as an educator and your administrator.
Okay,
And
yeah.
your the administrator with the district and so on. Sometimes even within these different organizations, even outside of education, DEI is important even for innovation and moving to that next level of, you know, whatever type of money you want to have. So if you're a 6-figure business going into being a 7-figure and so forth, if you cannot, in the United States right now, if you cannot make a product that is marketable to a diverse set of people, because you don't have a diverse workforce that feels psychologically safe, you are doing harm. You know what I mean? To your business. It is statistically proven that if you have DEI and really not even just diversity, equity, it's really that inclusion. You're really having inclusive practices, not only at the top level where it's like a policy or procedure, but those managers have to be taught inclusive practices in order to retain.
Okay.
And so that's what we're having issues when we're talking about teachers and students. You know, our organization, we protect teachers too. You know what I mean? And so that is why DEI is so important to us, because it's two-pronged. It's not just how we are interacting with our students, but it's how are we creating these psychologically safe work environments for teachers and other educational stakeholders from a diverse set of identities.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I actually think that's a really interesting point.
It's an important point. Yeah.
I'm like totally spitballing this here, but I also think like safe workforce is like a legal standard for teachers, and we are a right to work state.
Yeah.
We also have unions, and like if you are creating a space that is increasingly hostile towards minority teachers, but to Black teachers, to disabled teachers, to gay teachers, to trans teachers, which is the direction all of this is going. you're setting yourself up for lawsuits, for defunding, to be quite honest, destabilization, high turnover. And so while that may not pan out immediately, I do think ultimately that is going to be the accountability, right?
Absolutely.
Like that you're going to create a system that is so untenable that you will be held accountable through litigation. And there is already, this is already happening. Teachers are being persecuted for trying to operate within the letter of the law. It's a bad law, first of all. And this is going to make it harder.
Yeah.
Because the other part of like what is happening is like if you don't know what you're not supposed to teach, how do you know you're not teaching it? Is part of the problem, right? Like,
or no training for any of this. We don't know any of this. We literally see it on TV and we're like, what does that mean? Okay. I don't know. Let me ask ChatGPT. But you know what I mean? Like, that's literally, nobody knows. That's what I'm saying. Where's the training? There's no type of professional development around any of this.
We're moving to a place where AI is going to solve literally all of our problems anyway. So.
Except for legal research.
Yes, except.
I made the mistake of trying to... Look, if it can do it, I would be delighted. But I tried to write... I was looking for a citation for something, and it... gave me one that was like great about like the benefits of DEI for teachers. And it was like this great title. Come to find out, totally unreal. Totally generated.
Wow.
And I was like, I thought I was losing my mind because I do know how to check a citation, but man.
Yeah. I have a $20 version yet?
No.
Okay.
No, I will not.
I'll teach you.
But I think like ultimately if we are, I don't know, I think like if we are... I think ultimately what this is gonna look like is eventually voting, right? Which I'm not a voting organization.
Yeah,
that's not what we do. But I would love to see like legal policy that turns that into an elected board. One, because we don't know who these folks. Well, actually, we do know somewhat who these folks are. They're predominantly white. Of the 18 people, only 3 of them are black. Of the 18 people, most of them are men.
Oh, wow.
And it was giving country accent, so sundown towns. That's what I'm getting.
Okay.
I mean, it's giving sundown.
Like, yeah. Well, and I looked at some of those counties, and they are majority white, or the schools that they work in are majority white. And you wonder, like, you're an assistant principal of this school.
Mm-hmm.
Your students still need to learn how to operate in a diverse world.
Yeah.
Maybe some of them will never leave their community. But as someone who grew up in one of those counties, like, just on the other side, I grew up in the Florida side of this.
Yeah.
But like, you leave and learn how much bigger the world is. And if you realize that the failure was because your school or your state and your legislature are the ones who failed you, the kids know.
And they chose.
They know.
Not to.
Right.
Yeah.
And they know now.
Yeah.
So the biggest thing I think for us is just like making sure people know what's happening.
What do parents have to say?
Neither of us
I won't
are
say
parents.
crickets, but I will say this. Parents do care. The parents that I talk to about what's going on, they do care, but at points there's barriers to entry because they also have internalized trauma from education, and they feel as if they cannot come in and be a equal partner in making sure that their students are getting the education that they deserve. And so I find it to be very sad for a lot of parents, and I feel like we don't have an open door policy, even in these Title I schools, because a lot of these different admin teachers are not,
culturally competent.
Yeah. Or descriptively representative, if that's the case. And it's so unfortunate. And so there's barriers to entry. They can't get off. They got 2 jobs. They can't get off. They can't go to school board meetings. They'll privately endorse you as they come in and thank you for being a teacher to their child. But that is the extent of what they can do. But a lot of a lot of parents, and I will say even white parents care about what's going on.
Sure.
You have white parents that are like, I want my students to learn diversity, equity, inclusion. But I can only imagine when you're around, all of your friends and that there's a certain type of socialization that happens. And if you're not deeply rooted in your authenticity, how does that look? You know what I mean?
Or in that curiosity that you may not be, you feel comfortable to even share that amongst your colleagues or your friends or.
Right.
And I think, I don't know, I think something else, we've talked a lot about how this is going to impact kids of color, because I think ultimately the precedent is there that kids of color are going to be the most harmed by this. But this is going to hurt every kid.
Absolutely.
White kids, rich kids, poor kids.
Yeah.
Because when you stop, so much of what kids learn from us, I think, is less about like what actually comes out of our mouths and more about the ways that we treat them and treat their peers. That parents know when their kids are being harmed.
Yeah.
Right? And so that's where I know I've talked about the framework a lot. Like, they know when teachers are not inclusive. And I'm thinking of especially like parents of kids with disabilities.
Yeah.
I'm thinking like, and like so many, I think so much has been focused on race, but this is going to hurt like every single kid, because DEI is not just about race. It's also about like inclusion for kids with disabilities. It's about
sexual orientation,
religious
girls
affiliation. Girls, I'm in my math class, right?
Yeah.
Like the underrepresentation of young women in STEM classes, like the intentional investment of young girls in AP science, AP math, the intentional investment of young Black boys in AP science.
Yeah.
AP history, like, or even just like career pathways. And this is, but that's the challenge, right? Is you're talking about some buzzwords that have much larger implications and translating the implications to parents. But most parents know when teachers are not inclusive, and they do not want that for their kids. And they don't want their kids to learn that way. So I think a lot of parents, I think Arian hit it, that a lot of folks just can't plug into this.
Yeah.
Because this is like a very obscure commission most people have never heard of, have never like, let alone been to a meeting, which none of us had ever been to a meeting. And this is all I do.
She really does.
Yeah.
All I do is education policy. I was like, I don't know anything about this commission. I don't know how it works. I spent an embarrassingly long amount of time trying to just figure out how the meetings worked, who to talk to. And I get paid to do this.
Yeah.
I was not working another job. I was not trying to get someone to soccer practice. I was not trying to get people like more than my cats and my husband fed. He's making dinner most of the time anyway. Like,
I understand that.
Like, I am responsible mainly for me, and I am paid to do this work. And I still couldn't navigate this system the right way. And so who has time?
Who? Yeah.
So parents care. And I really think they do. And we had several parents speak at the most recent meeting. A majority of the folks who spoke are parents.
Yeah, that's great.
And a lot of them spoke to the concerns that they have about their kids.
Yeah.
And they were dismissing us like, you only have 30 more seconds.
Just
like it was aggressive.
And that was the staff. The commissioners didn't even turn on their cameras the whole time.
Yeah,
like,
it was a bit
the commissioners
aggressive.
were not there.
Yeah.
And so it's just, and that's also like the kind of negative feedback that people don't want to engage with. Why would I go
just talking to
downtown Atlanta at 3 p.m. in the afternoon on a work day?
Yeah.
To speak to a bunch of black boxes with names on them.
Yeah.
I'm telling you.
That's what being a teacher is like. But like, I just did virtual teaching.
Yeah.
But
I did too, girl.
But I think parents care, but I also think this is intentionally not accessible.
So when we talk about like what's next,
Yeah.
how do we fight it? What can people do about it? Do you think it needs to get into the hands of parents? Like, where do y'all want this to go to make sure we're moving this some type of progress along and knowing more about it and being able to, I don't know, what do we want to do?
Recognize that this is a civil rights movement again, and that we need everybody. You know, this is not just education, but these are everything that's going on within the state of Georgia, within the South, within the United States. We have to become collective. We have to really get on an agenda in general and really fight truth to power and realize that we are better together in numbers. I really think sometimes, you know, there's one-off situations where you'll have a couple of us here fighting. And sometimes when we are on, you see the only people that continue to fight, we look like head asses. And we don't want to look like head asses anymore. We need other people to come out and do this work, okay? You know, show up, y'all. Like, you see something like, oh, yeah, they out here doing it. No, we need y'all to be out here doing it.
It's almost like you see somebody running down the street. I need to be doing that.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
I be feeling like a big head ass sometimes, you know?
I'm so glad you said
Respectfully.
that. One, because I feel like I'm screaming into the void all the time. And when you first asked that question, I was like, everyone. I want everyone to know this is happening. Because it's going to impact everyone. Every
Legislative
kid,
session.
every teacher,
Everybody need to be there.
every administrator. Yeah. And I would love for parents to be involved, especially because politicians only listen to parents because parents are voters. But so are teachers. And soon, very, very soon, so are our students.
Yeah.
Yes.
Some of your kids actually,
Are
most of
voting.
my
Yes,
kids can vote
yes,
now too.
Yes, and you know that we made sure that they did.
But I want folks to know.
If you had anything to do with it, I'm sure. They're
But
probably already running for
your
office.
kids were probably registered to vote before they, like, at the week they walked into
They
your
are
classroom.
probably on the ballot.
Yes.
Yes.
We're not playing. And also, I think it's really, this was like the main crux of what I want people to do, especially those that are from diverse identities. Live your truth and follow your purpose and realize that the sky is the limit. I think sometimes we allow ourselves to be placed in these boxes. We also feel very insecure at points due to our identity. And I want to say that that is a lie, that you can do whatever it is that you want to do with intention and with the right mindset. So I think sometimes where we feel like, I remember thinking the work that I'm doing now, I was like, I need to get a doctorate. I need to be at Harvard. I need to be out here doing it. 2 degrees from Georgia State. Okay, her. And I'm doing this work. You know what I mean?
Do you think you even needed those degrees? Do you think you even needed those degrees? Truly?
Honestly, to meet some of the folks that I did, absolutely. The networking was there. And then also, when I learn, like, I learn for real. You know what I mean? Like, I use every
Big
piece
nerd.
of degree, everything that I learned, like how I did the grassroots movement.
Oh, yeah.
Like, everything from Georgia State, I utilized to run a grassroots movement and to then build a nonprofit. But I really just believe in my heart that I don't know who is out there. I don't know if you're a Black girl, you're a Latinx man, whoever you are that's listening to this, just know that you too can have your dreams, and to always make sure you go back to the community and build. I think that sometimes we forget to go back to our communities and help the generation behind us and pull them up. It's not about seniority anymore. It's about meritocracy. If they're willing to work and they're willing to put in the time and the effort to really do the things, let's put people on for real. I'm tired of that. That's what I'm really tired of. I've been marginalized due to my gender, my race, and my age so many different times. But when I found somebody that would put me on and let me speak truth to power, I continue to do that and bring other people on and let them speak truth to power. So I would just say, follow your dreams. That's really what I would say. And to give back to your community, however you see fit to do that.
So where do folks go to learn more about this information? If they want to come and speak, if they want to participate, like, what do they need to do?
You go first. 'cause
Okay,
you got
I will
lots of
say
things.
definitely plug in with Georgia Educators for Equity and Justice, y'all. We represent Black families, Black students, Black teachers, okay? We speak truth to power. We would love for you guys to come out and speak at our events. If you're one of those, if you're a activists and you're doing work within these different communities, we're trying to get connected to all communities, especially DeKalb, Fulton, Cobb. We're already in Clayco. Where's Gray? Okay, well, the Decatur, where's Gray? Let me not. Oh, I'm not looking line up here. But y'all, we
Don't
really
let the folk from Decatur get you, okay?
They gonna get me. But we really need to connect. We need a network of Black educators, because not only do we want to build this nonprofit and make sure that we have a collective? I want a political action committee. I want it at the highest level where I'm dictating who we voting for, where our money is going. Because again, I'm tired, and I'm going to just say this now. Let me not be a Kanye, but the Democratic Party ain't for Black people sometimes. And it just is what it is. And we need to be reckoned with it, because Black women are some of the most loyal set of constituents to the Democratic Party. And we are the least likely to get voted in office. And I'll be damned if y'all think that ain't there's not another way. Because there always is. Yeah. So I suggest y'all get y'all together. That's all I would say about that. And that's just on that.
Michaela, what you got? How can folks get involved?
So I would say, IDRA does a lot of different approaches to this work. We do state level advocacy. That's the majority of my job. But we also convene a group of folks from all around the state. Truly, I'm so proud of this. From actually all over the state. We coordinate the Coalition for Education Justice, which is how I met Arian. But it's still a growing organization. It's still new. We're still trying to figure out how we want to do this work, but we do train folks to come and speak at the Capitol. We coordinate advocacy days to come and speak to legislators, to come speak to, we coordinated coming to speak to the commission, which is, again, this very obscure little space. And I still had such a beautiful representation of the voices and stakeholders in this. And so I would say plug in with the coalition. We have a website. We're on hiatus for the summer because, but we'll come back. We will reconvene in August, and we'll meet monthly until probably November. And then we'll start back on weekly meetings, and we just do policy updates. We do trainings. We do, and we're also trying to move towards just training folks on inclusive practices, culturally sustaining teaching. What are the things that they are attacking? What do those actually look like? Because I think one of the best ways to combat this is with information and with education. And making sure that folks know what's being attacked so they can make the decision for themselves to oppose it or support it. Because again, if so many of the folks that we're talking about haven't even read these things, they've never sat in a classroom with a teacher who does DEI. So our goal is to expose folks to those things so that they can make the decisions for themselves. And so many times we find that parents, and it's the grown-ups who really benefit from that because they've never gotten that experience. I can't tell you the number of times I've had a parent say to me, I feel like having a teacher like that would have changed my life. And that is our goal, right?
Or the teachers that are like that, that have changed their lives.
Yes, exactly. And changes our classrooms. It makes our classrooms safer. It makes our kids safer. And at a time when kids are extremely unsafe in every other context, school should be
in a lot of ways.
Exactly.
Sure.
So the Coalition for Education Justice, I write things sometimes for IDRA. And you said our long name, which is the Intercultural Development Research Association, and we just
go by IDRA, y'all.
Yeah, IDRA is just easier for everybody.
What's the website?
IDRA.org.
See, that's easy.
We know. Because we know, and we're a 50-year-old organization. We celebrate our 50th anniversary this year.
That's great.
That's we have a wealth of resources on that. We've been advocating for culturally sustaining teaching for decades.
Wow.
And so we have a wealth of resources on that. And our goal is just to try and disperse those to as many people as want it.
My goodness. So. Michaela, Arian, you all are doing some amazing work on the ground. Thank you. Thank you for what y'all are doing for kids, for students, for families, for teachers, for our communities in the state. I can't thank you all enough for all of your hard work. It is not easy reading all of these bills and having to do all of this research and figure all of these things out. Y'all, legislative session starts again. It's a 2-year session, so the next part of our biennial session will be in January. these lovely ladies are going to need your help. So if you are a student, if you are a parent, if you are a teacher, please get plugged in. Information will be available on our caption and the description. We'll make sure that you have all of the information. There should be some stuff popping up on the screen right now that you'll probably see. But thank y'all for tuning in. Thanks for listening to me and listening to Michaela and Arian. We had a good time, but we had a great time talking about some really, really important issues. I can't thank y'all enough for everything that you're doing in the state. Again, this is Ashley with Progress Georgia and Georgia Smothered and Covered. Take care, y'all. Peace out.
Thank you so much,
That's
Ashley.
so cute.
This is
Oh
great.
my God.
I love that it's smothered and covered.
That's
I didn't.
clever.
Thanks, y'all.